Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Pathfinder. The KLR continues to evolve. I'm sure that many of you, like us, have been experiencing some unusually warm weather, even though we're only into the first week of March. But I have had an opportunity to take the bike out and ride it some. I think I put about 4 or 5 hours on it since the last video I did. And I'm really happy with a lot of the upgrades I've done so far. These tank pads have been really nice. They do add some grip. The crash bars from dirt racks have been really good. I have heard some stories about weird vibrations or whatever at speed with these racks mounted. I'm sorry if you're experiencing that. I didn't notice any weird vibrations. Nothing vibrated loose. Everything's good. Now, one thing I do continue to have problems with is the geometry of the foot controls. I know a lot of other people have experienced this. The relationship between the foot peg and the shift lever and getting your toe in there. If you've watched the channel in the past, you may have already seen some videos where I address some of these issues. I put better foot pegs on it. I put the Tusk billet foot pegs on. I put a longer shift lever on the bike. It's not a Tusk. It's an M-Go, but it's the same as the Tusk. The Tusk just wasn't available last year when I was looking for a new shift lever, so I bought this one instead. It's essentially identical. That did help a little bit because it's about an inch longer than the factory shift lever. I was able to adjust it where I could get my normal boots in underneath and ride fairly confidently. But more recently, I've been trying to upgrade my safety equipment. I'm trying to be more safety conscious as I get older when I'm riding. And I went out and bought a nice pair of motorcycle boots. I mean, these are kind of mid-range. They're not super expensive. These are the Forma Adventure Talls. And these are great boots. They're about $300, so they're not super high-end, but they're kind of mid-range. And these are great boots, but as motorcycle boots are supposed to do to protect your legs in a crash, they do limit your range of motion a little bit. And these boots have a fairly high toe box. Also, they have a sort of a hard plastic or rubber plate on here to protect the leather upper of the boot from the shift lever. And because these restrict your range of motion, I'm having a hard time getting my toe underneath the shift lever again. And I thought about playing around with some other kind of aftermarket shift lever. I know a lot of different people have their own favorites. There's the Happy Trails. There's the Tusk. There's a couple other companies that make aftermarket shift levers. But I've finally arrived at the conclusion, and most people seem to agree, certainly people that have played around with a bunch of different solutions to try to work out this geometry problem, particularly when you're wearing real motorcycle boots, is to get the foot pegs lower. And there is a solution for that, and I went ahead and shelled out some more money to buy these foot peg lowering brackets from JNS Engineering. They do a couple of things. They lower the foot peg about an inch. And on top of that, they eliminate the rubber damping that's in the factory foot peg mounting brackets on the Gen 3 Kawasaki. I think those do a really good job of isolating your feet from vibrations. They do have a tendency to sag. A lot of people don't like that. I haven't had a problem riding on these pegs standing up from a sagging perspective. At least since I put these aftermarket Tusk pegs on with the steel studs. They're very, very grippy. I don't feel like I'm going to slide off at all. So the rubber damping hasn't been a problem for me, but the continued problem of being able to get my toe under the shift lever has. I've been riding a motorcycle for about 30 years at this point, and all of this stuff should be second nature. It should all be muscle memory. And I feel like a brand new rider. I feel like I'm 16 years old because every single time I've got to upshift, I'm having to consciously manipulate my foot around and get underneath that lever to upshift. And that is not good. If you're focusing on your shifting, you're not focusing on what's going on around you. And this is just an unsafe setup. So we're going to go ahead and put these new mounting brackets on. Some of you may have noticed I also got a proper motorcycle lift, but it wasn't until after I lifted the bike up that I realized that the lift is bearing up against the bottom of the factory brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the bike down off the lift. I'm going to dismount the factory peg brackets. You don't need to see me do that. It's just those two zinc plated bolts underneath the foot peg. It's a very straightforward process. You take the two bolts out and the bracket's going to come right off. And we will reconvene over on the bench and we'll take a closer look at these brackets. We'll compare them with the factory Kawasaki brackets. Okay, everyone, so here are our factory foot peg mounting brackets, and we can take a quick look at these before we look at the new low-mounted brackets from JNS Engineering. You can get an idea of how these things are designed to work. The mounting bolts go through steel bushings, which are isolated from the bracket itself by these rubber dampers that are built in. And then there's a pad, a rubber pad that just pushes up into two holes on the bottom of the mounting box. And that pad bears against this portion of the bracket to further damp your ride. But what happens is you get a lot of sagging. This compresses, these compress, and actually, now I weigh north of 250 pounds, but I've only got about 3,000 miles on the bike. The bike's less than a year old. And these outer rubber bushings that go around the inner steel bushings are already starting to blow out. So if you leave these brackets on for a while, I can see that these rubber dampers around the steel bushings may completely disintegrate eventually. And then you're not going to just have sagging foot pegs, you're going to have rattling foot pegs, which is not great. So I don't know if this is the greatest design ever. They do a nice job of isolating your feet from vibration, but I don't know. I don't think this was Kawasaki's defining moment when it came to engineering. So anyway, here's one of the replacement brackets from JNS, and you can see right away it's going to mount our foot peg quite a bit lower. You get about an extra inch of clearance using this because the riser arm here is much shorter than on the factory bracket. And you can see it's made out of heavier material as well, so it should be a bit stronger. Not that I really think that these are going to give way on you, but except for maybe these rubber bushings. But they are sort of confidence inspiring in their strength. And of course, these will be rigidly mounted. So when you get these JNS engineering mounting brackets, they come in a sealed plastic bag. I like that. I like bags that are sealed up because then if you've got parts missing, you're not wondering whether or not they were lost in shipping or they just didn't get packed or whatever. So it came in a sealed bag. Everything was nicely cushioned. And you get two brackets. Both brackets are in their own sealed bags. I haven't cut this one out yet. And then you get a bag that has 4 mounting bolts in it. These are essentially the same as these mounting bolts. They're just a little bit shorter, and I think that's something to do with the extra length of this bushing housing. So you get a little bit shorter bolts. And by the way, if you need replacement bolts, these are 8mm diameter bolts, and they have a 12mm head on them. And of course, in addition to the bolts, we got a JNS Engineering decal in there. That's always a nice touch. Anyone who knows me knows I love my stickers, and that'll end up on my top box. So I guess that's pretty much all there is to really look at here. These look like quality, heavy-duty units, and they're definitely quite a bit shorter in altitude than the factory brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and mount these pegs into the brackets a while, and then we're going to go ahead and install them onto the bike. Okay, so we've got the pegs mounted into the brackets, and I can already see that there's a huge difference between these and the factory brackets. One thing to note, I've seen this in other guys' videos, the only thing that's left here that's factory is this pin. The pegs, the springs, the brackets are all aftermarket. The factory pins will not go through the holes in this bracket. The factory pins are 315 in diameter, 0.315, 315 thousandths. The holes are slightly undersized, and I had to float them out. Now, I had a 316 drill bit, but that didn't really seem to be doing anything, so I went up. The next size drill bit I had was 323, which if you have a lettered drill index is a P. So that gave me an extra, 8 thousandths of wiggle room, and they went together just fine. So I just wanted to make a note of that before we installed them. I've seen other guys run into this problem. You might run into it as well. And it's better. That's another reason I wanted to assemble the pegs onto the brackets before I tried mounting them on the bike, because if you've got to float out these holes, it's a lot easier to do while you still have them on the bench top than after you've already mounted them to the bike. I mean, it's not a big deal taking them back off the bike, but it's just a lot easier to find out about it here when you're not bent over at the waist or kneeling on concrete. So let's go ahead and mount one of these. All right, so we're going to go ahead and mount our right hand or brake side bracket here. And as you can see, this is a very straightforward process. You've got 2 holes here. You've got 2 threaded holes here. You've got 2 M8 bolts with M12 heads. But there are a couple of points I'd like to make that are pretty important. First of all, there's a temptation, because we're going to be standing on these pegs, especially off-road, that you feel like you're going to want to torque these bolts down very, very tightly, 60, 70, 80 pounds, and that is not the case. My little handy cheat sheet here tells us that the torque spec for the peg bolts is 18 foot-pounds. And before anybody jumps in and points out that this is a cheat sheet for Gen 2 bikes, I am aware of that, but that torque spec has not changed, and I know that because I have another cheat sheet here, which is from the Gen 3 Kawasaki service manual, and that's going to be too small for you to read, but it's somewhere here, also 18 pounds. You definitely do not want to strip these things out. These are basically just nuts that are tack welded to the inside of this mounting box. And these can strip out. If they strip out, the only way to get to them is to cut the mounting box off, get in there, get those nuts cut out of there, tack weld new nuts on, remount the mounting box, re-weld everything, paint everything. It's a big pain in the ass. I watched a video of a guy doing that. So the best thing to do is not to strip them out at all in the first place. So 18 foot-pounds. I've got my trusty old Craftsman torque wrench here with an M12 socket on it. One thing to keep in mind, unless you're a professional mechanic and you're changing the torque specs on your torque wrench like every day, if you're somebody like me, I only use my torque wrench like once or twice a year. Always reset it to 0 when you're done using it so you don't stress the springs that are inside here. And because of this relatively low torque specification, and because I really, really don't want these to vibrate loose, we're going to use a little red thread locker on these bolts. I know somebody's going to probably scream and go, "Don't use red thread locker, you'll never get it out again." I don't know where people got the idea that red Loctite was the equivalent of super glue. I was Loctiting stuff for 20 years before I knew that blue Loctite even existed. And to be clear, I use blue Loctite a lot nowadays. There we go. And I like it for a lot of applications, but these I really don't want vibrating loose. So red Loctite it is, and if we ever need to get it off, we'll manage. There's the hole. There it is. And of course the compressor for the water cooler keeps kicking on. Please excuse that noise. And here we go, 18 foot-pounds. Doesn't seem like much. Okay. That's not going to work. I need an extension for that one, apparently. Using an extension on a torque wrench can throw off your torque readings, so try to keep it as straight as possible. There we go. That's 18 foot-pounds. Yep, that's on there. And I can see right away that made a big difference. The toe of the brake lever was about 1/4 of an inch below the footbed of the peg with the old brackets on there. And it's now about 3/4 of an inch higher than the footbed of the peg. So we did indeed get an inch downward out of these mounting brackets. I will throw up some before and after footage with this aluminum bracket so you can see the difference between the factory brackets and these new JNS lowering brackets. I'll put up footage of both the brake side and the shift lever side. So anyway, it seems to have done its job. I should definitely be able to get my Frankenstein boot under on the other side. So you don't need to hear me blather on anymore. I think these look like they're going to do the job. They seem nice and solid. And so I'm going to go ahead and button up the other side of this and start working on editing this video and getting it posted. And I hope to see each of you on the next one. Later, guys. Oh, and one quick little postscript. The toe of your brake lever should actually be below the level of the footbed of your peg by about 1/4 of an inch, particularly for off-road riding. If you have to pull a little wheelie to get up over a log or a rock or something. So I'll probably have to make some adjustment here to get the toe of the brake lever down a little bit. This will be fine for road riding, for testing all of this out. But you're probably going to want to adjust that, and I certainly will be in the future. So, all right, later, guys.